Feeling nostalgic? Next time you're out, there are some old school dishes you should try, and some you should avoid. Something you may not have known about meatloaf is that it likely got its start in medieval Europe during the 500s as a way to use up leftover veggies and other ingredients. However, some food historians say meatloaf wasn't popular in the US until the 1870s. With beef, onions, eggs, milk, and bread, this iteration looked a lot closer to the meatloaf we recognize today. Unfortunately, not all meatloaves are created equal, and when you're dining out, you have to contend with the possibility of mystery ingredients. When it's good, it's amazing, but not every place gets it right. Because it's so unpredictable, we recommend simply avoiding this dish when you go to a restaurant.
Meatloaf, double beetloaf. I hate meatloaf.
Oscar-style steak comes to us by way of 19th century Swedish king Oscar Frederick. The original recipe called for a stack of veal, crab meat, melted butter, and white asparagus. However, the dish has evolved now to include a nice piece of beef like filet mignon, covered in a classic French sauce, such as béarnaise or hollandaise. The next layer is either lobster or crab meat with a couple of pieces of white or green asparagus resting on top. The problem with ordering Oscar-style steak is that not every restaurant can prepare it properly. If the steak is tough, it ruins the experience. Then there's the problem of restaurants serving your steak hot while everything on top is cold. Additionally, egg-based sauces like hollandaise and béarnaise are a breeding ground for bacteria that can cause food poisoning. Steak tartare has been on French menus since the late 1800s. Diners became extremely fond of ordering the dish in the 1950s before it faded from menus. However, it's now among retro foods making a comeback. It tends to be widely popular with anyone willing to eat seasoned raw beef and raw eggs. However, the real issue is whether or not the steak tartare is safe to eat. According to the USDA, the raw meat and raw eggs in steak tartare have been linked to dangerous food poisoning outbreaks. Heating your meat and eggs to proper temperatures is the only way to kill bacteria that can lead to illness. With this in mind, no matter how much you may enjoy it, eating steak tartare is always a health risk. Deviled eggs were once a dish you almost exclusively saw at home or at potlucks, but they've evolved into a trendy restaurant appetizer. While very few people will sit down and gobble up a large quantity of plain boiled eggs, once you've added a condiment like mayo and other flavoring components like bacon, people suddenly can't stop eating them.
Deviled eggs? Wait a second. Hold the eggs!
Unfortunately, ordering them from a restaurant can be a hit or miss. Some establishments, such as Jar in Los Angeles, are making interesting and beloved variations like crab deviled eggs. Other recipes, however, aren't all that popular, and when restaurants prepare them too far in advance, they suffer in both texture and flavor. The humble wedge salad appears to have first shown up in the 1916 Salads, Sandwiches, and Chafing Dish Recipes cookbook. Within a few years, restaurants across the US were placing an intact wedge of iceberg lettuce on a plate with a few extra ingredients and calling it a salad. The dish morphed over time to include crumbles of bacon, blue cheese, and a topping of creamy dressing. In the past few years, the salad has made a comeback on restaurant menus, though it's hit or miss. Customers complain about getting lettuce that's either not very fresh or all white rather than green. Some miss having more toppings like tomato or red onions. It's a simple salad, but not every restaurant is getting it right, especially when their focus is more on the quality of their meat than their produce. If you grew up in the southern part of the US, you were just as likely to have a pimento cheese sandwich in your school lunchbox as a PB&J. The spread debuted in a 1908 Good Housekeeping recipe, but after World War II, home cooks eventually replaced the cream cheese and mustard with cheddar cheese chunks and mayonnaise. Recently, pimento cheese has made its way into restaurant menus. Feltner Brothers in Fayetteville, Arkansas, has a wildly popular hometown burger on its menu served with pimento cheese instead of a slice of cheese. Meanwhile, New York City's Root and Bone is serving up its cheese grits with pimento cheese mixed in, and customers are loving it. Once upon a time, you only really found grits in the southern portion of the United States, and almost exclusively for breakfast. But now, you'll find them on trendy menus across the US, and they're not just for the morning anymore. Chefs everywhere are experimenting with different ingredients to bring them to life, and the most popular pairing is usually shrimp and grits. At Snooze, an AM eatery with locations around the country, the shrimp and grits contain tomatoes and mushrooms, with hot sauce for added heat. And at Red's Flavor Table in Inglewood, California, you might even find grits paired with salmon, jambalaya, or even short ribs. The original lobster Thermidor was likely served in a Parisian restaurant in honor of the play called Thermidor. While the play only lasted a few performances, the dish has endured. Lobster Thermidor contains a steamed lobster covered with creamy sauce and melted cheese. Some recipes, like Julia Child's, call for vegetables, delicate herbs, and cognac. When diners try lobster Thermidor, they have nothing but praise for it. New Zealanders and Australians fight over who created the Pavlova dessert, a meringue-based cake that's crisp on the outside and soft on the inside. The dish was made to honor Russian ballerina Anna Pavlova, who danced in both their countries in the 1920s. The dessert is layered with fresh or preserved fruit fillings, along with whipped cream and sometimes nuts. You normally can't go wrong ordering this retro menu item. Since most come with fresh fruit, it's one of the most refreshing desserts you can find. There are various iterations, including rum-soaked cherries and mascarpone, fluffernutter, passion fruit, chocolate, coconut panna cotta, and lemon cream. As you can probably guess from the name, Gougères are of French origin. These cheesy, light-as-air puff pastries are a delight, and while nobody is quite sure of the origin, they date back to at least the 1500s. Some say they were inspired by an Italian puff pastry recipe that Catherine de Medici's cooks brought to France when she became queen. However, the first mention of Gougères that historians can find comes from a 1571 wedding menu. It's no surprise that Gougères is served in New Orleans since this cuisine is French-inspired. However, they're even available as appetizers in non-French restaurants in the Midwest, like Novel Restaurant in Kansas City, Missouri. Named after billionaire John D. Rockefeller, this dish came about when escargot bourguignon started using oysters instead of snails during an 1899 escargot shortage. Oysters Rockefeller originated in a New Orleans restaurant called Antoine's, and it features oysters topped with breadcrumbs, shallots, garlic, spinach, Parmesan or Romano cheese, often Pernod, and sometimes cream, all blended together. The ingredients are baked in an oyster shell until golden brown. Those who aren't a fan of the mucus-like texture of raw oysters often find Oysters Rockefeller to be far more palatable. It's really a great way to eat oysters in a landlocked city since freshness isn't as much of a factor when they're cooked. When an ice cream cake comes to your table covered in a fiery meringue, you can't help but be impressed. Chef Charles Ranhofer dreamed up the baked Alaska at Delmonico's restaurant in New York City, so it doesn't actually come from Alaska. Instead, this delightful dessert celebrated the 1867 acquisition of Alaska as a state. The only people complaining about baked Alaska are people who find it suddenly missing from the menu. You just can't go wrong with a flaming layered ice cream cake. It's not only a production piece that turns dessert into an experience, but it also tastes amazing. So if you ever see this old school dish on the menu, be sure to save room for dessert. The first references to popovers historians have found are in an 1850 letter and an 1876 practical cooking cookbook recipe. When English immigrants came to the US, they ended up creating popovers as an alternative to Yorkshire pudding. Both are savory flour-based confections made with eggs, butter, and milk cooked in beef fat. The main difference is that popovers are baked in deeper pans, making them taller than Yorkshire pudding. While popovers haven't been popular in the US for quite some time, they've started reappearing in various restaurants across the US. Eateries are filling them with everything from cheese to liver mousse. They can even be filled with sweet ingredients like cherry filling. Overall, diners are embracing them and loving them. Beef Wellington is another celebratory dish. It marks the English Duke of Wellington's defeat of Napoleon in the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. While there's a reference to it in a 1903 Los Angeles Times article, it didn't become wildly popular in the US until Chef Julia Child made it on her cooking show in 1965. Still, many of us have never had the delectable pastry-encrusted beef dish. Luckily, this old-school menu item has been showing up on restaurant menus lately.
After all, I'm the one who suggested beef Wellington.
While most restaurants are making their customers universally happy with traditional beef Wellingtons, some, like Temple Court in New York City, make it with venison instead. It's important to note that the beef will be pink in the middle to avoid overcooking the pastry, so lovers of well-done meat should steer clear. Until recently, Southerners who visited other regions or moved out of the South weren't able to easily find their beloved collard and turnip greens. These core vegetables in Southern and soul food cooking can be bitter if not made correctly, but when you find someone who knows how to cook them, they're flavorful and delicious. Rather than only looking for greens in the South, you can now find turnip and collard greens in far-flung places all over, and they're not only in Southern restaurants anymore. It's important to note that these types of greens often contain pork for flavoring. So if you're a vegetarian or don't eat pork, it's a good idea to ask about the meat content before ordering. While we're not exactly sure when casseroles first appeared in kitchens, they go back to at least the 1700s. However, it wasn't until the Great Depression that they became a staple of US cuisine, as home cooks were trying to stretch ingredients as far as possible. Old-school casseroles are showing back up on restaurant menus, and they're doing better than you'd expect for a retro dish that is often reheated rather than made fresh. While Cracker Barrel has had a perpetual hit with its hash brown casserole, restaurants are now churning out all sorts of comforting recipes. Offerings range from old favorites like green bean casserole to more inventive dishes like lamb chop casserole, spaghetti squash casserole, and seafood casserole.
Maybe I wasn't ready to face the liver and onions quite yet.
Liver and onions may not be at the top of everyone's list. However, many people grew up eating this dish because liver was cheap, and it packs a lot of nutrients. Among other vitamins and minerals, liver provides 3,460% of your daily vitamin B12 needs, 1,620% of your daily copper needs, up to 1,100% of your daily vitamin A needs, and up to 260% of your daily vitamin B2 needs, according to Healthline. If the idea of liver and onions activates your nostalgia, you're probably more likely than others to order the dish when you find it on a restaurant menu. And the strong flavors of organ meat and onions aren't just showing up in small rural diners as you'd expect, but also in fancier big city restaurants from New York to LA.